Be me Joe, 28. I'm a software dev at a small, no-nonsense tech company. My little corner of the office is basically a three-man island. There's me, Harlan, and Caden. Harlan is our senior systems architect, probably in his late 40s. He's one of those guys who remembers when the internet was just a handful of university computers. He's seen it all, and his patience for corporate nonsense is zero. Harlan's philosophy is simple. The truth is the truth. If your code is a mess, he'll tell you it's a mess. Not to be mean, but because it's a mess and it needs to be fixed. Then there's Caden. He's the junior dev, fresh out of college, maybe 24. The guy is a walking encyclopedia of internet memes and has the impulse control of a golden retriever. He's smart, but his brain-to-mouth filter is permanently broken. We worked well together. The dynamic was solid. We were a well-oiled machine built on caffeine, mutual respect, and roasting each other into oblivion. If you messed up, you got called out. You took the heat you learned, and you moved on. After work, we'd grab a beer and it was all forgotten. No drama, no grudges. It was efficient. It was honest. It was, for a small IT department, pretty peaceful. Then, one day, the company decided our little sausage fest needed some diversity. That's when Delilah arrived. She was hired as a mid-level developer, same as me. The boss introduced her during our weekly team meeting. She had this intense, serious look in her eyes. She stood up after the introduction and cleared her throat, like she was about to make a UN declaration. She said she wanted to get a few things out in the open, right from the start. According to her, she was a proud feminist. She made it very clear she wasn't here to be treated with kid gloves. She specifically said, and I remember this part perfectly, "Don't feel like you have to change how you act because I'm here. Don't censor your jokes. Don't hold the door. Don't offer to carry things for me. I want to be treated exactly like one of the guys." She looked each of us in the eye as she said it, with a sort of defiant chin-up expression. Harlan just slowly raised an eyebrow. He didn't say a word, but his face said everything. It was a look that communicated, "Are you absolutely sure about that?" Caden had a massive grin spreading across his face. You could practically see the gears turning in his head. I just sort of nodded. If that's what she wanted, fine by me. Less mental gymnastics for everyone. The boss looked relieved. He probably saw her speech as a free pass to avoid any future HR complaints. Oh, the irony. The meeting ended, and she went to her new desk, which was right next to mine. The first day was quiet. She was just setting up her machine, getting her accounts sorted. We left her alone, figured we'd let her get settled. The real test started on day 2. It was a Tuesday morning, I think. Caden strolls in, looking like he hadn't slept. He flops into his chair and groans, "Dudes, I'm running on fumes. Someone needs to do a coffee run, stat." He looked over at me, then at Harlan, and then his eyes landed on Delilah. It was an unwritten rule. The new guy, regardless of who they were, usually did the first week's coffee run. It was a dumb, simple team ritual. A moment of silence hung in the air. You could see the internal conflict on Delilah's face. Her programming was fighting itself. On one hand, she was the new person. On the other, she was being asked to do a menial task by a man. She hesitated for a solid 5 seconds. Then a tight, forced smile appeared. "Fine," she said, her voice a little clipped. "What does everyone want?" Caden, being Caden, ordered some ridiculously complicated vanilla caramel whatever latte with soy milk and extra foam. Harlan just wanted black coffee. "As dark and bitter as my soul," he deadpanned. I asked for a regular Americano. She wrote it all down, grabbed her purse, and left without another word. When she got back 20 minutes later, she just placed the cups on our desks without making eye contact and immediately put on her headphones. The first brick in the wall was laid. A few days later, we were in the middle of a troubleshooting session. The staging server was throwing a weird error, and we were all huddled around Harlan's monitor. Caden was trying to debug a script he wrote. Man, this bug is more persistent than my aunt asking me why I'm still single. Harlan grunted in agreement. It's stuck in there like a piece of popcorn in your teeth. Delilah, who was looking over my shoulder, let out a very loud, very theatrical sigh. It was the kind of sigh designed to be heard. It was a sigh that said, I am surrounded by children. Nobody acknowledged it. We just kept working on the problem. She didn't offer any solutions, just stood there radiating disapproval. She wanted to be one of the guys, but it was becoming clear she didn't want to partake in the actual culture of being one of the guys. She seemed to think it was a status she could be granted, not a role she had to earn and participate in. The end of the first week arrived. Delilah made her first real technical mistake. It wasn't a huge deal, something every dev has done at least once. She was working on a feature and accidentally committed her code to the wrong branch in Git, then tried to force push it. It caused a minor headache for Harlan, who had to spend an hour untangling the mess. Once it was fixed, Caden leaned back in his chair. All right, deleter Delilah, he said with a chuckle. Next time, maybe ask before you try to rewrite history. The name stuck instantly. In our team, nicknames were a sign of affection. They were born from mistakes. Harlan was the Oracle, because he once predicted a server failure down to the minute. But we also called him Captain Crash, because he once brought down the whole network by tripping over a power cable. Caden was Captain Copy-Paste, because we caught him using Stack Overflow for a simple for loop. I was Joe Va because of my coffee addiction. The nicknames were stupid, but they were ours. They were part of the team's fabric. Delilah did not appreciate her new moniker. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Her face went cold. She just stared at Caden with a look of pure ice. Don't call me that. Caden's smile faded. Whoa, hey, we all have them. It's just a joke. I don't find it funny, she replied, and turned back to her monitor. The atmosphere in the office got thick and awkward for a few minutes. Harlan just shook his head slowly. She wanted the title of one of the guys, but she refused to accept the initiation rites. The following weeks settled into a tense routine. Delilah would come in, say a clipped good morning, to no one in particular, put on her headphones and work in silence. She did her job. Her work was adequate. Not great, not terrible, just fine. But she never engaged. She was an island in our little 3-person archipelago. We'd still try to include her, as per her original request. On Fridays, we usually went out for lunch. Our go-to spot was a greasy burger joint down the street. I made a point to ask her the first few times. Hey, Delilah, we're heading to the clogged artery for lunch. You want to come? She would just look up from her screen and give me a look of disgust. I don't eat that, she'd say, as if I'd offered her a plate of dirt. After the third refusal, we stopped asking. We weren't trying to exclude her. She was just making it clear she didn't want to be included. The real friction, however, started happening during our technical discussions. Our team thrived on brutal honesty. We held code reviews where we would tear each other's work apart. The goal wasn't to belittle anyone. It was to find every single flaw before the code went live. Your feelings were irrelevant. The quality of the product was all that mattered. Delilah submitted her first major piece of work for review about a month in. It was a new module for our main application. Harlan, being the senior, was the one who reviewed it. He spent about 2 hours going through her code line by line. When he was done, he rolled his chair over to her desk. I was sitting right there, so I heard the whole thing. He didn't raise his voice. He wasn't angry. He was just factual, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. This won't work, he began. Your logic has race conditions. There are at least 3 major memory leaks, and your variable naming is completely inconsistent. It's unreadable. Did you run any performance tests on this at all? Delilah stared at him, her face turning pale. then red. She started to defend herself. "I was following the specifications." Harlan cut her off, holding up a hand. "The specs don't say to write inefficient buggy code. This isn't a personal attack. This is a technical assessment. The work is not up to standard. You need to scrap it and start over. Read the documentation on thread safety before you write another line." He then rolled his chair back to his desk and got back to work. Delilah looked like she was about to cry. She looked over at me, probably expecting some sympathy. I just gave her a small shrug. This was normal. This was Harlan. He was tough, but he was always fair. To prove the point, about an hour later, I heard Harlan's voice again. "Caden, get over here." Caden went over to his desk. "This API endpoint you wrote," Harlan said, in the exact same tone he used with Delilah. "It's a security nightmare. You're practically inviting an SQL injection attack. Are you trying to get us all fired?" Caden looked at the screen, and his eyes went wide. "Oh, crap. You're right. I totally forgot to sanitize that input. My bad." "You're bad?" Harlan said. "This is rookie stuff. Fix it. Now." Caden just laughed. "On it, boss. Guess that's what I get for coding after a night of gaming." He went back to his desk and started fixing his mistake, completely unfazed. The difference in reactions was staggering. Caden saw the feedback for what it was, a critique of his work. Delilah saw the feedback as a critique of her as a person. From that day on, she started treating every technical discussion as a personal battle. During planning meetings, she would get defensive if anyone questioned her ideas. If we pointed out a potential flaw in her logic, she would accuse us of not listening or trying to undermine her. She started using corporate buzzwords to defend her position. She talked about synergy and thinking outside the box when we were trying to discuss database normalization. It was exhausting. Our fast-paced, direct brainstorming sessions became bogged down in her emotional responses. We had to start walking on eggshells around her, which was the exact opposite of what she had demanded on her first day. The hypocrisy was getting thicker by the day. She wanted the respect given to one of the guys, but refused to accept the responsibilities, like taking criticism, admitting when you're wrong, and not taking everything personally. Sometime around the end of spring, things escalated. We had a major project deadline approaching. The pressure was on. We were working on a big client-facing release, and everyone was putting in extra hours. The team was running on fumes and cheap pizza. Delilah was tasked with a fairly important but isolated component, a new reporting engine. It was her chance to prove herself, to really own a piece of the project. We had a design meeting about it. Harlan laid out the architecture very clearly. He emphasized how it needed to interface with the main database. He specifically and repeatedly told her to use read-only transactions to pull the data, to avoid any possibility of locking up the tables or corrupting anything. "Do not, under any circumstances, write directly to these tables," he said. "Pull the data, do your calculations, and that's it." She nodded, saying she understood completely. A week later, she announced that her component was ready for integration testing. It was a Thursday afternoon. The whole office was in a pre-release frenzy. Harlan gave her the green light to deploy her code to the staging environment so we could all test it. She ran her deployment script, and then all hell broke loose. First, my local development environment froze. Then Caden yelled that he couldn't connect to the database. Alarms started going off on Harlan's monitor. Red flags everywhere. The entire staging environment, a perfect mirror of our live production system, was completely unresponsive. Harlan's face was grim. He typed furiously for a few minutes, his knuckles white. "The database," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "The primary customer table is locked. Something is holding a write lock on it and won't let go." Everyone looked at Delilah. Her face was ashen. "I don't know what happened," she stammered. "My script just reads the data." Harlan didn't even look at her. "Let me see your code." She reluctantly brought up her code on her monitor. Harlan, Caden, and I crowded around her desk. It took Harlan about 10 seconds to find the problem. Buried deep in her code was a function that, instead of just reading from the customer table, tried to add a temporary last reported on timestamp column to it. It was an incredibly stupid, unnecessary, and dangerous operation. And because she had wrapped it in a faulty transaction that never completed, it had locked the most important table in our entire system, bringing all development and testing to a grinding halt. Harlan just pointed at the screen. He didn't yell, he didn't scream. He just said, "What is that?" "I thought it would be more efficient to tag the rows I'd already processed," Delilah whispered, looking at the floor. "I told you," Harlan said, his voice barely audible but filled with a cold fury. "Read, only. This is going to take hours to fix. We might have to restore the whole database from last night's backup. We've just lost an entire day of work, maybe more." Delilah finally looked up, her eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Before she could finish, Caden, trying to break the suffocating tension, made a fatal mistake. He tried to lighten the mood with a joke. "Well," he said with a nervous laugh, "looks like Deleter. Delilah has evolved into Table Lock Delilah." That was it. That was the final straw. The dam broke. Delilah let out a choked sob. "That's it," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I can't work like this. This environment is so toxic." She pointed a shaking finger at Caden. "You're always making fun of me." Then she pointed at Harlan. "And you're constantly criticizing me, making me feel stupid." She looked at me. "And you just sit there and let it happen." We were all stunned into silence. "I did exactly what you all do," she cried. "I tried to be proactive, to find a better solution. And this is what I get? Ridicule and hostility? I'm done. I can't take this constant abuse." She grabbed her bag, stormed away from her desk, and ran out of the office sobbing. We just stood there, in the middle of our now silent, broken office. Harlan slowly turned away from her empty chair and looked at the rest of us. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Well," he said, rubbing his temples, "I guess she wasn't one of the guys after all." The air was heavy. We all knew this was far from over. This was going to get a lot worse before it got better. The sound of the office door slamming shut echoed in the sudden silence. We just stood there for a moment, the three of us in the wreckage of what was supposed to be a normal Thursday. The server alarms were still blinking a calm, methodical red on Harlan's screen. Caden was the first to speak. His face was pale. He looked genuinely shaken. "Dude, did I go too far? I was just trying to break the tension." Harlan let out a long, slow breath and finally turned away from Delilah's abandoned desk. He looked at Caden and shook his head. "No, kid, you didn't start the fire. You just threw a match on a pile of oily rags that's been soaking in gasoline for 3 months." He was right. Caden's joke was just the spark. The explosive material had been there all along. "Forget about her for a minute," Harlan said, his voice shifting back into professional mode. "We've got a database to save. Joe, start spinning up a new instance from last night's backup. Caden, go through her commit history and figure out the exact point everything went sideways. I'm going to try and kill this rogue process without corrupting the whole table." We got to work. The drama was put on hold. The problem was real, and it needed to be solved. It took us until almost 10 p.m. to get everything back to a stable state. We managed to save the table without a full restore, but we lost hours of work from other teams who relied on that staging server. The entire time we worked, nobody mentioned Delilah's name. It was like an unspoken agreement. We had a job to do. When we finally packed up to leave, the office was dark and quiet. Caden was still quiet, which was unusual for him. You think she's going to report us? It's not a question of if, Harlan said, grabbing his jacket. It's a question of when. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He was not wrong. I got to work the next morning, a little before 9. The atmosphere was heavy. Delilah's desk was empty, but her monitor was on, her keyboard and mouse neatly arranged. It was ominous. Harlan was already there, sipping his black coffee and staring at his screen with an unreadable expression. Caden came in a few minutes after me, looking like he hadn't slept at all. At 9:15 a.m. the email arrived. It was from our boss. The subject line was just, Meeting, Conference Room B, 10 a.m. It was addressed to me, Harlan, and Caden. My stomach dropped. Here we go. We walked over to the conference room together, like three guys walking to the gallows. When we opened the door, the scene was exactly what we expected. The boss was sitting at the head of the long table, looking tired and stressed. Next to him was a woman from HR I'd only seen a few times before. She had a notepad and a very neutral, almost robotic expression. And on the other side of the table, sitting by herself, was Delilah. Her eyes were red and puffy, but her expression was one of grim determination. She had a tissue clutched in her hand like a weapon. She looked at us as we entered, a flicker of something between fear and triumph in her eyes. We sat down opposite her. The silence in the room was deafening. The boss cleared his throat. All right, he started. We're here because Delilah has filed a formal complaint. She has made some very serious allegations about the work environment in the IT department. She's described a pattern of harassment, bullying, and misogyny. I want to hear everyone's side of this. Delilah, please tell them what you told me. This was it, her moment. She took a shaky breath and began. She spoke for nearly 15 minutes straight. It was a masterpiece of narrative construction. She had taken every single interaction we'd had over the past 3 months and twisted it into a piece of evidence for her case. The coffee run on her second day, a demeaning sexist task meant to establish her as a subordinate. The jokes and casual banter, a constant barrage of microaggressions and locker room talk designed to make her feel unwelcome. The nickname Deleter, Delilah, a cruel, targeted form of public humiliation meant to undermine her confidence after a small mistake. Harlan's code review, a vicious personal attack on her professional capabilities, an attempt to mansplain her own work to her and prove his superiority. Us going to lunch without her, a deliberate act of social exclusion, isolating her from the team. She painted a picture of herself as a lone woman bravely trying to succeed in a den of hostile, toxic men who had been conspiring to drive her out from the very beginning. The final incident with the database was, in her telling, the climax of our campaign. She claimed her mistake was minor, a result of the immense pressure she was under. Our reaction, the roasting, was not a team blowing off steam. It was, she said through fresh tears, a coordinated verbal assault. She used phrases like, I felt physically unsafe, and it was the most unprofessional and abusive experience of my life. When she finished, she dabbed her eyes with her tissue and looked at the boss, the very picture of a wronged victim. The HR woman was scribbling furiously on her notepad. My boss looked like he had the world's worst migraine. He turned his tired eyes to us. Well? He asked. His voice was flat. What do you have to say to that? Harlan and Caden both looked at me. I was the calm one, the observer. It was my turn. I took a deep breath. I knew I couldn't be emotional. I had to be factual. I had to be logical. Boss, I began, keeping my voice steady and calm. I've listened to everything Delilah said, and I understand why, from her perspective, it might feel that way. But she's leaving out the most important piece of context for everything that's happened since she started. I looked directly at Delilah. On your very first day, You stood up in the team meeting and you made a request. You told us, and I quote, to treat you exactly like one of the guys. You asked us not to censor ourselves, not to walk on eggshells, not to give you any special treatment. You asked for equality, and we gave it to you. That's what we've been doing for 3 months. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. The HR woman stopped writing and looked up at me. I decided to address her points one by one. The coffee run, I said. When I started here 4 years ago, I did the coffee run for the first week. When Caden started 2 years ago, he did it too. It's a stupid, pointless tradition for the new person, whoever they are. We treated her exactly like we treated ourselves. The nickname, I continued. We all have them. They're all born from mistakes. I'm Joe Va because I once spilled an entire pot of coffee on a server rack. Caden is Captain Copy-Paste, for reasons I won't bore you with. Harlan is Captain Crash. The nicknames aren't meant to humiliate. They're how we own our mistakes, laugh at them, and move on. She got one, too, just like everyone else. I looked over at Caden, who nodded in confirmation. The code review, I said, turning my attention to Harlan. Harlan is tough. He's tough on everyone, because his job is to make sure our work doesn't fail in production. What Delilah failed to mention is that about an hour after he reviewed her code, he called Caden over and told him his own code was a security nightmare and rookie stuff. The language was identical. The tone was identical. The difference? Caden said, "My bad, boss," laughed it off, and fixed it. He understood the criticism was about the code, not about him as a person. We treated her work with the same critical eye we treat all our work. Harlan gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The lunches, I went on. We invited her to our regular spot. She told us she found the food disgusting. That's fine. We respected her choice. We didn't keep asking because that would have been pestering her. We treated her like an adult who can make her own decisions. And finally, I said, taking another breath, yesterday, the database. She calls it a minor mistake. Boss, it wasn't minor. She ignored a direct instruction from the senior architect and took down the entire staging environment for 7 hours, the day before a major code freeze. The whole department's work stopped because of that mistake. It cost the company a significant amount of time and money. I paused, letting that sink in. When it was all over, yes, we gave her a hard time. We roasted her, because that's what we do. 2 years ago, I accidentally ran a script that wiped a test server. They were merciless. They called me Wreck-It Joe for a month. Last year, Caden pushed a bug to production that took down our website for 10 minutes. We still haven't let him live it down. It's our way of dealing with high-stress situations. We confront the screw-up, we make fun of it until it loses its power, and we learn from it as a team. We gave Delilah the exact same treatment we would have given me, or Caden, or even Harlan, if one of us had made a mistake of that magnitude. I leaned forward slightly. We honored her request. We treated her exactly as an equal. We treated her like one of the guys. The problem is, she seems to have wanted the privileges of being part of the team without any of the responsibilities. She wanted the camaraderie, but not the criticism. She wanted to be included, but only on her own terms. She wanted equality, but what she was really asking for was special treatment, under the guise of being treated the same. I finished and leaned back in my chair. The room was silent again. I had laid out the facts, plain and simple. No emotion, no accusations, just a timeline of events and the context she had conveniently omitted. Delilah was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. She looked genuinely shocked, as if it had never occurred to her that we would have a logical, documented response. She probably expected us to stumble, apologize, and confirm her narrative. The boss looked from me to Delilah, and then to the HR woman. He seemed to be thinking for a long time. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was no longer just tired. It was firm. He looked directly at Delilah. "Delilah," he said, "I've heard both sides, and from what I can tell, your complaint isn't that you were treated differently from the men in your team. Your complaint is that you were treated exactly like them." That sentence hung in the air like a thunderclap. "This department," he continued, gesturing towards us, "has a specific culture. It's direct, it's brutally honest, and from a management perspective, it's incredibly effective. They are my highest performing team for a reason. They don't waste time on office politics. They focus on the work. You came in and you asked to be a part of that culture. They took you at your word." He steepled his fingers. "What you're describing isn't a hostile environment. It's a different environment. It's one that you, by your own admission, asked to join, and now you're saying you can't handle it. That's not their fault. That's a mismatch of expectations." The color drained from Delilah's face. The HR woman was just watching, her pen still. "So here's what we're going to do," the boss said. "Clearly, you're not a good fit for the IT department's culture. That's okay. We have other departments. The marketing team is looking for a data analyst. The environment there is very different. More collaborative in the way I think you're looking for. The pay is comparable. I can arrange for your transfer to start on Monday." It wasn't an offer. It was a verdict. He wasn't firing her. He was giving her an out. But it was an out that completely invalidated her entire complaint. He wasn't punishing us. He was moving her. Delilah was speechless. This was the worst possible outcome for her. She didn't get justice. She didn't get her villains punished. She was simply relocated, deemed incompatible. "So," she finally stammered, "that's it? You're just moving me? After everything I told you?" "I'm offering you a solution," the boss said calmly. "You can take the position in marketing, or you can decide that this company is not the right place for you. The choice is yours. But Harlan, Joe, and Caden will not be disciplined. From where I'm sitting, they did exactly what you asked them to do." She stared at him for a few more seconds, then deflated completely. The fight was gone. She had played her strongest card, and it had been countered with simple logic. "Fine," she mumbled, looking down at the table. "I'll take the marketing job." "Good," the boss said, standing up. "HR will handle the paperwork. This meeting is over." We stood up and filed out of the room. We didn't look at Delilah, and she didn't look at us. We walked back to our desks in silence. We didn't celebrate. We didn't high-five. We just sat down and got back to work. The next 2 weeks were quiet as she transitioned out of the department. She packed her things on a Friday afternoon while we were all in a meeting. When we got back, she was just gone. Her desk was empty. It felt like a storm had finally passed. That evening, we went to our usual spot, the greasy burger joint. We sat there with our beers, the familiar, comfortable silence between us again. After a while, Harlan raised his glass. He looked at me, then at Caden. "To getting the work done," he said. We clinked our glasses together. "To getting the work done," we repeated. And that was that. We never spoke of her again. The team was back to its old self. The machine was well-oiled again. And we learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes when someone asks to be treated like one of the guys, they have absolutely no idea what they're actually asking for.